Faza'il A'mal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 24. Two Opinions on Weak Hadith, Zahid Kawthari's Confusion.
Imam Suyuti is actually mentioned under the ahadith that are mawdu'. This is a fabrication. Even the author says he can't find it in the books of hadith. Yani there is no sanad, there is no chain to tie it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this hadith is a fabrication.
At this juncture in the thesis, we are coming towards the end and we are winding down this whole series. But the conclusion of this work by Dr. Younis Al-Turkistany really is superb, because he summarizes the whole of the thesis quite neatly. In this section, it states that there are two opinions, and this has been mentioned previously in the thesis as well, but it's a good summary here. There are two opinions when it comes to using weak ahadith. And I'll give you the two opinions and then I'll go to the thesis that we'll be looking at going forward. The first opinion is it is permissible to be lenient towards weak ahadith as far as virtues are concerned. And this opinion is the majority of the scholars, like Sufyan al-Thawri, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Yahya ibn Ma'in, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Ibn Abdul Barr, Ibn Qudama, Nawawi, and the list goes on and on and on. But they give certain conditions for when these sorts of hadith can be used, these weak hadith. And any honest academic clinical researcher will be able to see that the FA clearly doesn't meet these conditions. The first is the hadith should not be weak as if it is reported only by a liar, someone accused of lying or making grave mistakes, or of being often negligent. Number two, the hadith should be generic, in that another more specific hadith does not invalidate it. Number three, the person should not be convinced of its soundness while acting upon it. So the person should know that this is actually weak. Number four, the person should not spread the weak hadith, so that the weak hadith is not acted upon, which will cause invalid rules to find their way into Islamic legislation. Number five, it should not contradict authentic ahadith or stronger evidences. And number six, it doesn't contain additional details or estimations or specifications of those mentioned in authentic sources. So these are quite clear, explicit reasons. The second opinion of those who do not permit the use of weak ahadith. And this is something there are some of the scholars, it's not the majority that hold this opinion, but some of them hold this opinion. And some early scholars, and including them is someone who was in the first group, so he had two opinions on this. This is Ahmed ibn Hanbal, who is one of the four eponymous founders and establishers of one of the four schools of Sunni law. And another individual is Yahya bin Ma'in, and another person is Muslim ibn Hajjaj, Muhammad ibn Hibban al-Busti, and amongst later scholars there's Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, Abu Shama al-Maqdisi, and al-Shawkani. And in the modern period there are individuals like Ahmed Shakir, Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani, and Muhammad ibn Uthaymin, and others. And then Dr. Turkistany at this juncture gives his opinion. He says, in our opinion, the first opinion, i.e. in the event of the conditions being practically applied, is the moderate opinion, because weak hadith are of different degrees of weakness on the one hand. On the other hand, scholars disagree in their judgment of weak hadith, and their rulings differ according to specific considerations, as was explained in the second chapter. Based on this, those who have this opinion about dealing with weak hadith, according to that which they find suitable in their own opinion, they do not ignore them completely and treat them like fabricated ahadith. And then he goes on to mention the leniency. So this is quite a neat summary of what he's already covered. But if those six conditions are met, then a person, an individual, can act upon the weak hadith. And this is the scholarly dichotomy between these two accounts. Enough with the FA and enough with the TJ. Now I come to a wonderful thesis, and this thesis was submitted in the university known as McGill in Canada, and it's nearly touching 40 years. So this thesis is nearly 40 years old, come 2023, and it's called "The Role of Hadith in Ikhtilaf Among Muslim Jurists." Ikhtilaf just means differences, and it's written by an individual called Masood Salim Abdul Qadir, and it was submitted in Montreal in February 1983. And this work is only 155 pages, but within this 155 pages there's packed a lot of information, and there are two individuals that are mentioned that are critiqued quite systematically. Well, not systematically, but there are scathing critiques leveled against them, and amongst these critiques are critiques that you could find on this channel as well. So the first of these individuals is a man called Muhammad Zahid Al-Kawthari, and the second is an individual called Muhammad Awama. In this first part, or in this part number 24, I'll be talking about Al-Kawthari, and in part number 25 I'll be talking about Muhammad Awama. But before we actually go to the individual, I'll actually go through in quite a neat summary on page number 2 and 3 the things that the author Masood Salim Abdul Qadir considers the reasons for why there is difference, ikhtilaf, between Muslim jurists. So this is a really nice summary of what he believes and what scholars have believed is the cause of differences of opinion. Point number 1, disagreement in understanding the interpretation of the Quran or the Sunnah. Number 2, disagreement due to the ignorance of the Sunnah. Number 3, disagreement due to non-availability of a nas in a particular case, that means a text, a legal text. And number 4, disagreement due to the doubt in the authenticity of ahadith. So these are the 4 poles, these are the 4 main areas around which ikhtilaf or differences in relation to hadith occur, according to this master's thesis submitted in 1983. So this 40-year-old master's thesis that has been hidden and I'm bringing to your attention. So these are the reasons for the ikhtilaf, and who he quotes is, he quotes in his time, so there are obviously more modern works now, but there are 6 modern authors that talked about this cause of ikhtilaf. And amongst the classical authors, there's an individual known as Imam Al-Shatibi, and I've discussed Imam Al-Shatibi in other videos on this channel, particularly his conception of what Islamic innovation, bid'ah, is. But here he's talking about modern day studies of ikhtilaf. The first is a work written by a man called Al-Khafif, another is Mustafa Al-Khin, another is by a scholar called Al-Turki, and another one is by Al-Bayanuni, and a fifth one is Al-Zulaymi. But the 6th one is a work by a man called Muhammad Awama, Athar al-Hadith fi Ikhtilaf al-Fuqaha. And as I said, in the next part I'll discuss exactly what he says about Muhammad Awama. But the individual that I want to look at today is someone who is very, very influential in the modern world when it comes to hadith sciences, and this is a man called Muhammad Zahid Al-Kawthari. And in the other video found on this channel, I have given the mistakes that Muhammad Zahid Al-Kawthari made in not even being able to get narrators, the names of narrators correct, and I actually gave a quote and a screenshot of a book called Tahdhib al-Tahdhib that actually gave the correct name, and it seems that Al-Kawthari mistook or purposefully forgot or did not know or was unable to quote the name. And here he says, this is from Abdul Qadir, Masood Abdul Qadir, what is strange here is the statement of Al-Kawthari. He says Abu Hanifa and Malik and his followers have used the mursal as reference. The mursal is a weak type of hadith which in the chain of narration you are missing the companion of the Prophet. So you have the Prophet saying, doing, or tacitly approving something. Then you have immediately straight after that in the chain Tabi'i, which is a follower of a companion. So the whole companion is not even mentioned. So because of that fact, it's a weak type of hadith. But what Kawthari gets mixed up is he mixes up the opinions of Abu Hanifa, Malik and Shafi'i in the acceptability of this type of mursal report. So I could read it for you, but this video would get very long. In any case, this is what Masood Abdul Qadir says. Al-Kawthari has contradicted himself when he says Ash-Shafi'i is the first one to reject the mursal. He illustrates with the words of Abu Dawood in his letter to the people of Mecca, as well as the statement of Ibn Jarir at-Tabari. How can Ash-Shafi'i use the mursal as a reference and reject it at the same time? And then he later goes on and says this is indeed very strange from Al-Kawthari. In any case, this thesis is available for you to read, and if you want to read in detail the exact contradiction and strangeness and confusion of Kawthari, you can do so. And you can also look at my other videos where Kawthari mixes things up. If you're interested in even more research, a very famous scholar called Abdurrahman al-Muallimi wrote a whole book about this topic, and the title of this book is known as Tankil. So stay tuned for many more parts, and in the next part we will be looking at Muhammad Awama. Stay tuned.